What are the definition of contract of loan? A contract of loan or loan agreement is legally binding agreement between the lender and the borrower, outlining the terms and condition of loan, including the amount, interest rate, repayment schedule, and other relevant details. A contract of loan is a formal agreement where one party is the lender and then provides the money or the other property to another party is the borrower, with the understanding that the borrower will repay the amount along with any agreed upon or other charges.
The main function of a contract of loan is to provide clarity and protection to both parties by clearly defining their rights and obligations, such as repayment terms, interest, and consequences of not paying back. With the contract in writing, there is a clear legal basis for resolving disputes and a better understanding of the contract's term. A contract of loan is considered executed at the moment when the object of the loan is actually delivered to the borrower. So, to put it simply, the contract of loan is executed, or as we know as perfected, only upon the delivery of the thing, such as the money or goods loaned. It's not similar to other contracts such as contract of sale, which can be perfected by a consent. A contract of loan requires the action or delivery of the object for it to be a valid contract. So, until the money or goods are not yet received by the borrower, there is no real contract of loan yet.
Moving on, the parties involved in a contract of loan are the debtor or borrower and the creditor or lender. The obligations of both parties is that the creditor or the lender will be giving the amount that is agreed upon between both parties, and the debtor or borrower has the obligation of repaying that amount back to the creditor with any agreed upon interest due between them. And meanwhile, the agreement between them in a contract of loan is that the creditor or lender will be giving an amount that that borrower or debtor asked for, and then meanwhile afterwards that the debtor will be giving back or repaying that amount owed to the creditor.
In a contract of loan, there are three essential elements that must be present: consent, object, and cause. These elements are important because under Article 1318 of the Civil Code, a contract cannot exist unless all three requisites are present. So let's define each one. First is the consent. This refers to the mutual agreement between both parties. It means that both the lender and the borrower willingly agree to the terms and conditions of the contract. Second is object. This is the subject matter of the contract, usually the money or goods loaned. It is the prestation or thing that the borrower receives and is obligated to return. Third and last is the cause. This is the reason or purpose behind entering into the contract. For instance, the borrower may need money to pay for hospital fees, while the lender may want to help or earn interest.
For the purpose of identifying the obligations, we will take a look at a loan agreement from Pag-ibig. The debtor is the one borrowing a sum of 1.4 million, which is the prestation, from Pag-ibig in order to fund the renovation for their home. The creditor, being Pag-ibig, approves of the loan. but only after the debtor complies with all of the requirements that the lender has given them within 90 days. The obligation presented in this contract is a conjunctive obligation with a period or term, as the creditor gave the debtor a list of performances and they must accomplish all of them within the allotted time period, that being 90 days, in order for the creditor to approve the loan. If the debtor did not accomplish all of them in a certain period, the contract would be invalid. Loan contracts also have a number of legal implications attached to it, most of them existing to make sure the contract will be fair for both parties and no one will be unjustly enriched. On the side of the lender, in the case of the borrower defaulting, he may ask for foreclosure, where the property and assets of the borrower can be demanded by the lender to recover the original amount of the loan. Moreover, the lender can also invoke a acceleration clause, where the lender can demand immediate repayment from the borrower. On the side of the borrower, however, they can file a lawsuit to a court on account of excessive rates, and the court has the right to lower the rates if they are indeed excessive. Moreover, Republic Act No. 3765, or the Truth in Lending Act, mandates that lenders disclose the true cost of borrowing, including the interest rates and other fees, ensuring that the borrowers are fully informed of the contract before consenting to it. Other relevant information includes what was called the usury law, wherein the interest rates of the loan was capped in order to protect the borrower from excessive rates. However, this has been ineffective since the Central Bank Circular No. 905, which allows interest rates to be freely determined by parties involving in the transaction. Moving on, I will now be discussing what are absolute and conditional deeds of sale as well as comparing them to one another. But before that, I will be discussing first what is property in order for us to clearly understand what is the topic about. When we say property, it is a tangible or intangible thing that a person can own the rights to. It also has the same meaning as an asset, but formally it is called property. Now, there are two kinds of properties. Those that are immovable and fixed are called real property. Examples include land, buildings, improvements on the land, and permanent fixtures like fences and walls. Now, while those that are movable are called personal property, which also includes the vehicles, equipment, company shares, and intangible or intellectual rights or assets. Now, absolute deeds of sale is a legal binding document that transfers the rights of a property from the seller to the buyer, after the purchase price has been paid by the latter only. It is more convenient as the buyer only needs to pay the price itself in order to immediately acquire the rights of the property itself. Conditional deeds of sale, on the other hand, are legal documents that are only executable upon the fulfillment of certain conditions, which are agreed upon by both the buyer and the seller. Even if the purchase price has been paid by the buyer, the buyer still needs to complete the conditions assigned to him. Otherwise, the rights of the property will not be transferred unto him. Now, another difference they have is that absolute deeds can be considered as an accessory contract, as they are the result or the effect of the conditional deed after the conditions have been fulfilled, while the conditional deed of sale itself is a preparatory contract, since it is the preliminary step that needs to be fulfilled before acquiring the rights of a property. With the main one being, they both involve the transfership of owner to one another. But absolute and conditional deeds also have similarities with one another, with the main one being they both transfer the rights of one property from one person to another. Additionally, they also require the consent of all the parties involved in order to validate the contract. They are also legal documents, meaning that they can be shown as evidence in trial or court if the time ever comes.
A contract of sale and a contract to sell are both legal agreements, but what are their differences? A contract of sale is a legal agreement wherein there is a transfer of ownership of an item from the seller to the buyer immediately. And meanwhile, for the contract to sell, usually it has a condition for the buyer to adhere to before transferring the ownership of an item to the buyer.
So what are the main differences between a contract of sale and a contract to sell? One of the key differences that can be noticed in the description that I have given earlier is that a contract of sale is immediate. It is absolute. The transfer of ownership of an item from the seller to the buyer is immediately. There are no conditions to be met from the buyer. It is immediate. The ownership is turned over to the buyer. Meanwhile, a contract to sell, there is a condition that a buyer has to fulfill first before having full ownership of an item from the seller. Therefore, it is not immediate, it is not absolute compared to a contract of sale. An obligation of a buyer for a contract of sale is to pay the price, of course. Since it is a sale, a buyer has to pay the price in return to having full ownership of an item. Meanwhile, in a contract to sell, the buyer has to fulfill an obligation. The transfer of ownership of an item to the buyer is deferred until the buyer is able to completely fulfill the condition given by the seller.
There is a small gap between the differences and effects of a conditional sale and a contract to sell. So, to understand clearly its differences, first let's define what is a conditional sale. A conditional sale is an agreement between the seller and the buyer, where the buyer takes the object but not the ownership or the title. Buyer can take the ownership only when the conditions agreed are met. And in a contract to sell, it is basically a promise of a seller to the buyer or to sell the object. So the seller is bound by the agreement, and the ownership and possession is obtained by buyer only when the conditions are met. Again, conditional sale, buyer gets the object but not the ownership. And ownership is transferred only after full payment or after fulfilling the conditions. While in a contract to sell, seller is bound to the sale and buyer can demand delivery and ownership of the object if they fulfill the condition.